You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
Part of the thing is the subtitle of this show is Indulge's Tangent, so I don't know.
Yeah, so you okay?
I don't know.
So
we
might be talking.
I can't help there.
I'll try my best. I'll do my best.
Honest and straightforward.
Okay.
This is Ken Vellante, and this is the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast, and I'm super excited to introduce Rebecca Mills. Before I start going on, Rebecca, I just wanted to say hi and welcome to the show. It's great to see you.
Thank you. It's great to see you too. Thank you. This is great.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me again.
Yeah. It's nice to be able to connect with you out here in Oregon, which actually some wild weather. Hopefully nothing interrupts us. We got up to 65 mile-per-hour wind gusts today.
Oh wow.
So it's wild, but it's as
Are you in the mountains?
No, just on regular old land, but it's whipping through. Yeah. So and we're reaching Rebecca from the great state of New York, and really excited. I've counted your art on the Ultra Plastic Galaxy website that you have, and you on Instagram, Honeydew Milkshake, and we'll make sure everybody gets those tags and such. But one of the things I wanted to ask you, Rebecca, starting off our conversation is when did you see yourself, as an artist? When did you start walking around and being people like, that's the artist, or you saying out loud, like, yeah, that's me? When did that happen? Do you know when that happened?
Yeah, so that happened when I was a teenager, because my first job was at an art center. And so, like, before I even started really working there, I was in a program that, like, when you're able to work, it was really for like 14 year olds, 15-year-olds. Like, when you're able to work, how do you apply to a job? How do you write a resume? What do you wear to your interview? Like, it taught us all of these things. Yeah. And then when I completed the program, they gave us a list of places to apply to, and they would help us get a job or help us get an internship. So out of the list of everything, it was like all types of stuff that didn't sound interesting to me. But when I saw that there was an art center, I was like, oh, an art center sounds cool. And at the time, I didn't really know anything about art.
Sure.
But like, I knew art was a subject that I was stronger in. And so I was like, let me try this out. And so when I first started working there and being surrounded by art and being like meeting artists and seeing like what goes into putting a exhibit together or running a center or classes, things of that nature, I was like, wow, I can really see myself doing this. And so from there, I kept pursuing art. And then I would say, like, because I studied painting and creative writing in college. So I would say, like, it was after I graduated that I was like, no, I really, really am an artist. Like, there's nothing else that I could really do with myself or see myself as, Like, right now I work as a supervisor at Whole Foods. And even though that has nothing really to do with the art world, it's like I'm working a career that is it's paying my bills, but it's also like not making me bring work home with me. So I'm able to leave work and be like, wow, okay, let me focus on my art and let me think about what it is I want to do. So that's where I'm at,
Yeah.
Like, this is like my life.
Yeah. And I like that. I talk to artists a lot of times because it's an interesting question, because sometimes I ask it as if it's a choice or something. I think I've asked it long enough and just being like, when did you see yourself become the artist? Because one thing I've discovered in talking to artists is that it's in that announcement, in that behavior, in that term that people are like, okay, now I can, I don't know, maybe do more or maybe have more freedom to express myself, because this is how I interact with the world as part of my identity. So
yeah, and I relate to that too, because I I love the expressive side of life, you know, and I feel like with so many other types of things, there's not much room to be individual thinking, or rather creative thinking. And so with studying the arts, specifically, you know, visual arts and creative writing, it has allowed me to take my worldview and put it into something that I think I can share with people. And so I mean, it's interesting you're a philosopher, because I love reading philosophy and thinking philosophically, and I love history and science and things like that. But it's like, I wouldn't necessarily say like, okay, I'm going to be a biochemist, or like I'm going to write this philosophical book, but I can take all of this subject matter and compile it into my art and filter it in ways where it's very serious, and you can be contemplated over the work, or you can appreciate the beauty of it, you know, like it gives that creativity to what's serious in this world, you know.
Yeah, and I wanted to jump in on that too, because that's actually what my mind was thinking, because we were talking about like seeing yourself as an artist, and then you're talking about like that expression with your paintings. I want to jump into that because, like, for me, one of the things that I think is really cool is, you know, on the show with the big questions, you know, philosophy and all that. I think of science as well, and I think of outer space immediately, like, you know.
Yes.
So, and I see that that's in yours because, um I've had a couple scientists come on the show, and it's like the something rather than nothing, or why we doing all these big things. But I wanted to get into your painting in that in that outer space, in that type of world. Let's talk about that world,
Yeah.
in outer space. Well, you had me at the mermaids that were in outer space. Like I was, you had me then. But tell us about, you're talking about putting it into your art, and talking about those things and seeing them and contemplating. Let's get into those paintings. Tell me what you're doing with those in that world you
Yeah.
create.
Yeah, so let me just start with why I use outer space to begin with.
Yeah,
So do you know who Sun Ra is, the
sure do.
musician?
Love
Yeah,
Sun
so
Ra.
Sun Ra, I discovered him when I went to go see this exhibit at the Studio Museum in Harlem, like many, many years ago. I think it was like 2013 or something. I can't remember, but it was amazing the type of art that was created as a result of his music. And I was like, who is this person? Like, this art is great. Who is this person? So when I started looking more and more into Sun Ra and thinking about space, outer space being this endless landscape of endless infinite possibilities, then that's when I expanded my view entirely, and rethinking or repositioning myself, not just on this earth, but in existence overall. So I started there and really thinking about um, not just the material nature, but the transcendence of material nature. Because in order for us to even explore space, we have to think of outer space in transcendental aspects. So even though science doesn't necessarily think of transcendentalism, science is thinking empirically. But my thing is, we have to use these special tools in order to see what is otherwise invisible to the eye. And even though scientists won't call that transcendence, that's what it really comes down to, even to the atomic scale. We can't see atoms, but even to the atomic scale, like, what is powering an atom? What is behind all of these things? So that is always a looming thing that's on my mind. And I was raised Christian. I converted to being a Vaishnava. And if you don't know what Vaishnava is a form of Hinduism, specifically people who worship Krishna as the supreme person. So um, when you're Vaishnava, you have a understanding of the universe on an atomic scale or on a massive scale, but ultimately in a transcendental lens. And but even before I converted to Vaishnava, I still had this very spiritual and transcendental view of the world entirely.
Yeah.
So I'm applying this to outer space. And another thing to think of with Sun Ra is Another thing to think of with Sun Ra is his emphasis of there's other worlds out there. Like there's black people in the future. Like there's always been black people, but like there's diversity. You know, it's not just white people that are going to be the ones to be able to explore
Yeah.
space. It's anybody that has the ambition to it. And so that was another emphasis for me, is to say like we as like human beings, like citizens of this world, we're capable of thinking beyond this world, and this is how you can do it. So that's a premise to a lot of the work that I'm doing. So then I started to develop my landscape by situating it in the ultraplastic galaxy. So plastic and arts, it comes from plasticity and the capability to transform things. So this is a term that is used in surrealism. So for instance, like the best example that everyone can understand is Salvador Dali and how he melted the clock. And that in itself is a plastic use of art, is taking things that we understand and transforming it. Or even the human body, like how is the human body formable, and how I can contort it and do different things with it in art. Or taking an idea and making it plastic by, say, like for instance, the mermaids, right? So the mermaids are actually based off of the transatlantic slave trade. And what it is that I saw the painting by Turner, where it was his slave ship painting, and that influenced me by me thinking like, wow, like this is something, these are historic events that happened, but we're not necessarily always talking about like the actual passage, you know, what was happening in that passage. And there are plenty of like topics around it, there's art around it, but it's like, how can we heal from it? How can we think about what happened to those people?
Like transformation or something.
Exactly.
Transformation, yeah.
Exactly. And so that's where these paintings come from, is the transformation of the people. So I'm not thinking of this in a painful way. This is me actually healing by saying, um, our ancestors, the people like me who are of African descent, our ancestors, um, a part of religious belief and spiritual belief for them was knowing that there is an afterlife. And how do we transgress that afterlife? That was based off of your mentality. So what would happen is like there were and still are, like, you know, if you look at voodoo, like voodoo is something that was um, created or formed rather uh, when enslaved people came to the United
Or
States.
the conjure as well, right?
Yeah, like these type of things, like they came, like, you know, it's a combination of different religious beliefs that were kind of coagulated together because of enslavement, and they wanted to hold on to that historic past. But you can see that there's very elaborate rituals for when a person passes away so that they can help transgress the spiritual world on their own. But without these rituals, how do they still get to that place? So my thing was, when they entered the water, they were able to transform their bodies to survive in the water, but they don't live in this realm. They live in another world. So another, like one way to think of it is like there was a portal that was opened or created for them so that they can enter to another world, into this ultraplastic galaxy, and become these beautiful deep sea mermaids. Well, they're kind of grotesque looking, but for me, grotesque is also beautiful. So they're these very beautiful mermaids that live in the deep sea, or sometimes come above the waters, or, you know, like have all
Yeah.
these interesting things. They create their own light by bioluminescence and things of that nature. But then also water itself, like, you know, how water has such a history because of the transatlantic slave trade. So water itself plays a role in my work. So sometimes I'll paint bodies of water, thinking about how we need water to survive, thinking about like that slave trade, or even just thinking about how water, you know, the causal ocean, or how water plays a role in Hinduism. So connecting all of these things that otherwise seem like very disconnected, but how
Yeah.
water connects everything. Like literally water connects everyone on this planet because most of this planet is water. Also, we need water to survive, and currently we're destroying our water systems by pollution. And so like it's important to think about water, like
Yeah.
we need this. So
Yeah.
that's where that specific topic comes from in my art, and it is a major topic. But then I expand on into other series. So I will paint landscapes, or it's not really lands, but it's universe-scapes. I'll paint images of the universe and think about how, with our technology, we're measuring the universe using light, and how light travels through our universe. So when it comes to measurement of space, if you look at an image of like different universes or thousands of stars, it's actually red means further away and blue means closer when it comes to measuring. So knowing that, I try to situate the paintings in a reverse color theory, or even like thinking about temperature, how the lighter the color, the hotter it is, and the darker the color, the cooler it is. And so
Yeah.
it's a lot of opposites that are kind of happening. And so I'm exploring color theory through the universe. And in a way, these are also very transcendental, because when we look up at the night sky, we're not seeing these. We're seeing stars that are looking blue and bright, and then, it'll be like a nice midnight blue with some different shades of colors. But I can't see with my own eyes all of these things that this very expensive technology that we have is recording it.
Yeah.
So these things are playing a role. And then I do a lot of research on indigenous groups from around the world. So, for instance, like the tribal groups of the Americas, or the tribal groups of like West or South Africa, and specifically Vedic culture in India. Sometimes I look at like some European, but I really try to focus on the cultures that are underrepresented,
Yeah.
and like relate back to the subject matter that I'm doing, where these civilizations looked at the universe and recorded it scientifically, and were able to tell time by looking at the stars, or like had explanations for how the universe was created. Specifically, Vedic culture has extensive explanations for how the universe is created. And so I have art where it's seemingly abstract at first, but the more I speak about it, it's talking about that. It's talking about the matter being formed from life. So one thing that is heavily emphasized in Vaishnava culture or Vaishnava philosophy or science is that matter can't create matter. It has to be life that creates matter. So it was something that existed before that started to formulate all these things in order for us to have a physical material universe. And that's what powers it. So the atom didn't exist first. The atom is the result of something existing already. So these are very complicated things, but I try to make it tangible by putting it into works of art. And I know that the mermaids like seems like a far off topic now, because it's like, wait, now we're talking about atoms. But for me, this is all relative, because it's about transformation, it's about transcendentalism, and it's about how I'm thinking of how specifically West Africans, because that's where a lot of enslaved people come from, how these cultures have these topics already in their philosophies and cultures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
and
mean
the relation
the
of it
question.
all.
Yeah, the questions have been considered because you haven't encountered it, and they could be deeply embedded in. Hey, I haven't had a guest in quite a long time. I think answer the question, "Why is there something rather than nothing?" without me asking it. I think that's in there. I'll ask it again too,
Yeah,
so you can
yeah.
get it.
Yeah, we'll keep
Any,
talking.
anything that you missed. No, I am deeply intrigued by a lot of what you had to say. And one cool thing I heard early on was the Sun Ra. I studied philosophy formally, and it was like I guess there's a little anecdote. I had a friend of mine who was a jazz and music guy. Now he was studying his PhD in philosophy at the same time, but I swear, like I'd be at a party or see him socially, somebody pull me aside. He's like, "Ken, Sun Ra,
Yes,
you just gotta listen to Sun
he
Ra." Like
gets it.
I'm like studying Nietzsche
He
and
gets it.
Kierkegaard and Aquinas. He's like, "Sun
Yeah.
Ra." So
Yeah.
yeah, there was so I can't miss asking this question, placing Sun Ra
Yeah.
in the forefront here of the conversation. Tell me
Let's do
about
it.
what you said about the art that comes out of Sun Ra and the
Yeah.
music and what he had to say. What's all that about? Like, what comes out of
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. So what comes out of Sun Ra is literally why I started making art based in the universe. So first off, his compositions are very complicated, and it's very difficult for people to casually sit and listen to because it's not meant for that. His music is meant for people to it's meant for people to reach a higher spiritual vibration. So that's something that Sun Ra has emphasized in a lot of his interviews, is that he creates music for the soul. He creates music for the body, the mind, the soul, and the spirit. So that in itself is he's creating transcendental music. He also creates music based off of the sounds of outer space. So if you ever listen to, first off, NASA has a SoundCloud. I don't know if you knew this, but NASA has
I'm interested in space sounds, but I didn't know they
yeah,
had a SoundCloud.
they have a SoundCloud.
Okay.
So if you listen to NASA's SoundCloud, NASA has recordings from planets and how planets communicate with each other. So that's essentially gravity. Is, let's say you have Jupiter. Jupiter is sending signals to all of the different moons around it in order for them to maintain that gravitational pull. And so if you listen to those sounds being transmitted to one another, it's very much on par with the type of music that Sun Ra makes. Yes.
So wait a second. So, but in a certain sense, like holding that right there, he was
Yeah.
like this, like a telescopic receiver for some of
Yeah.
this, and somehow with that
He
connection,
definitely was.
Sun
And
Ra.
then another very important thing to understand is Sun Ra has, and this has been recorded in many different books, but that like speak about his life history. But Sun Ra was abducted by aliens, and in that abduction, he spoke to what he says is the creator of the universe and received a lot of information on how to help people, but also received a lot of information on how to make the music that he does. So when he came back to Earth, he realized he's not from this Earth. He's from Saturn. And that's why he like said he's Saturn. He also said he's an angel. And it's very important to know that Sun Ra was a very religious person. So he understood the transcendental nature of what he was doing and purposely did his best to help people. So he finds his music healing. And I find that I want my art to be like that, where it's healing to look at because it's beautiful. Like ultimately, whether you understand what I'm doing or not, I mainly want people to appreciate the beauty of it. That's why I use like glitter, these reflective materials. And if you look at Sun Ra's costumes when he performed, they wore these very beautiful, glittery, shiny, astrological looking, like
Yeah.
cosmic looking. And so that influences the visual nature of my art. Another thing with Sun Ra is how how to reject the westernized understanding of outer space in itself, because he knew, because he was in outer space, he knew that there's ways to travel in outer space, but we prevent ourselves from being able to do it because we're not thinking of outer space in a spiritual way. We're thinking in outer space in a greedy way. So we're not able to actually get there to achieve that traveling because we're too fixated on trying to colonize everything. But if we rethink how we want to travel outer space, we'll be able to travel it better, because we are being prevented from accessing that information. And it's important to understand that, because there are other living beings out there. There are higher powers out there, and they force us into staying on this earth until we're able to be intelligent enough to leave it. And we're currently not intelligent enough to be able to travel anywhere because of how we utilize our current resources. And so this actually goes into veganism. That was one of the questions.
Yeah, I was like, we haven't rehearsed, audience. We haven't rehearsed at all, but like, I have my notes here, and the question. I knew I just ask it a different way, but the question, why vegan? Rebecca, I've been a vegan since 1995.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I was a vegetarian. One of those kind of strange. Everybody has their story, but I was a vegetarian. I think meat eater. I was a vegetarian for about a week and a half, 2 weeks, and I actually had finished the very influential book "Animal Liberation" by Peter Singer.
I got to read that.
Yeah, which deeply impacted me. So then I was vegan. I want to say something comes up on the show, but it's not primary. As important it is to me, I know you've been active in this area, and I know in you talking about your paintings and talking about water and talking about our resources, this is embedded in our conversations. So tell me. Tell me how that's embedded in your life. Why vegan and connected to the art, all that stuff.
Yeah. So veganism is connected to my art because we have this one planet, like it has everything we need, and we actually don't need to go anywhere else. Because if you look at the other planets, they are like terrible landscapes. Like, I don't know, like, I mean, I know, like, I'm always looking at images of planets, so I don't know, like, how much people know about other planets, but like Jupiter is terrible. Like, it's horrifying. Like, there's constant storms, there's different temperatures. There's no way we could survive on a planet like that. Mercury is hot. We would burn. We would burn before we even got there. Like, we would just set on fire before we even got there. So it's like, we don't actually need to look at any other planet. We can just stay on this one. But we are destroying it for the sake of raising cheap beef, And another thing is, we're destroying it. We're destroying like the actual land itself, we're destroying water by our mass industrial animal farming, factor farming. This destroys our water. This destroys our ecosystem. It takes away biodiversity because they're cutting down trees and getting rid of so much habitable land for the sake of factory farming. So it's important to think like about that first, and then to think like, once we let animals go extinct, we can't get them back. Like, we are incapable. We can't even produce seeds. Like, we can't invent seeds. Once the seeds are gone, that's it. Once that grass is gone, that's it. Once the soil is destroyed, it takes so long for us to be able to restore it. So we do these things very irresponsibly, and we're destroying this one planet that we have. And so I emphasize veganism because we should think twice about why we're eating the food that we eat and how it destroys the planet that we're on. we have a pollution crisis going on, and it's
Yeah.
actually less about cars and more about factory farming. It's factory
Yeah.
farming that is causing the most pollution on this planet, for the air, for the environment, for everything. And if we stopped factory farming, if we cut down, if we closed down slaughterhouses, and if we focused more on wholesome food, we would actually be in a much better place. Another thing is we're losing out on nutrient dense foods by factory farming because people think eating meat is more important than having nutrient dense vegetables. And so people aren't getting what they really need from their food, and we actually have to eat more like we actually have to eat either more vegetables, or like specifically go to certain grocery stores where they care about the wholesomeness of the food. Otherwise, you're not actually getting the nutrients that you need. These things are important for life. And so I emphasize veganism in my art because it's like, what are we going to do when everything's gone? We're on this planet. Where are we going to go? Where are we going?
Oh yeah.
And like it, this is an existential crisis. So in my way of dealing with this existential crisis is to be a vegan activist. And I do have some paintings, they're not on my website, but I do have some paintings of like God, like different gods crying, or like a god coming down and bringing animals to us, because we can't get animals from anywhere else. Like it's important. Like one, like again, I just want to say, once an animal goes extinct, where are we going to get that animal from? Right? Like we have tigers that are dying, we have lions that are dying, we have elephants that are dying. There are hundreds of animals that go extinct every single year. And it's like these animals cannot be brought back. And they die, they go extinct because of greed and because of pollution and because of destroying the biodiversity of this earth. So we need to focus more on revitalizing and restoring what is already here. And specifically cow protection, because cows are the most abused of all. Like
Yeah.
this is also why I'm vegan. And like, because dairy farming alone, like they take away the calf once the cow gives birth, and that causes distress to the cow. Like animals are sentient beings, they are aware of what's happening. Like anyone, I mean, any mother giving birth is going to be depressed once you take her baby away. And like, not only that, they forced her, like they forced inseminated her, and now they're taking away her baby and causing her distress and leaving her in cramped conditions. So it's like, we need to think more about how to protect these cows. I mean, again, I'm Vaishnava, like it's well known, Indian Hindu culture cares deeply about the cows. Essentially, the cow is our mother. If you drink her milk, then she's your mother. If you don't drink her milk, you can at least appreciate her. But if you're drinking her milk, that's your mother. You want to treat your mother like that? Are you going to eat your mother? No. So then you treat her like that. You protect her. You give them better living environments. You let her stay with her calf. Let them be free and happy. You can have happy cows and still drink their milk. It's fine. But if you're abusing them and forcing them to do all these things, then you're not helping them. So, with all that said, this plays in a role in my art also because I like I said before, like, you know, there's themes of water, there's some paintings that I've made of animals, but ultimately, like, you know, it's also beyond just the paintings itself. It's the life that goes along with me, and that's why on my website I have the vegan living part, because it's like this goes into thinking about living on this planet and knowing that there are other worlds out there, but also we're here and we can protect this one.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, and I think I've found my thinking just recently with the more consciousness of seeing the severity of the crisis, environmental crisis, and for me for a long time knowing, um, I think a lot about water and runoff pollution and the concentration of waste in just extremely abnormal conditions for living beings. That's the thing that I think I've
Right.
reacted to over time, and I've felt that as things are right now, that compared to when I was younger, the situation's changed in my brain for this is that doing what we're doing is actually not an option anymore. It's not only is it not sustainable, it's not a viable option on the scale that we do it as a model, and I think that's borne
Yeah.
out by what we've seen. And so that's the piece where it kind of changes the debate a little bit. Like if something moves to the point of a production model, and that what's happening to animals moves to the point where you can't conduct yourselves and behave this way anymore, then it becomes a different discussion or non-discussion or something
Right.
when it comes to the activism. And I think that's
Yeah.
where vegans or activists, environmental activists, get what they have. And then on the outside, where people aren't as intimately connected to these things, they're like, stop yelling about, you know, stop yelling about the environment and the cows. I just want to eat. And it's like, well, that's
That's a problem.
that's you do that eating a lot, and the impact of what you eat. And
Exactly.
yeah, so I really appreciate your comments too about thinking about and embedding it. And again, I want to say metaphor, but just the image and your use of water that really stuck in my head, and then seeing
Yeah.
that right now and thinking about that um, in your paintings. Out of curiosity, too, as far as I did see that you do some activist work with vegans, so more, and I wanted to ask you within that too. I think you mentioned using art. I think in terms of this, so I'm a labor guy, labor union guy. I think about what art does to rattle, transform, disrupt. What does art do for you when you're talking about the vegan, the vegan stuff? Like how do you use that? Activist, I'm thinking.
Um, let's see. I it's kind of hard because I've been trying to find ways to make it more apparent in my work. Like I know the water is subtle. Like that is a subtle thing in so many ways because there's so many conversations around the water itself. But I that's something that I was looking forward to doing for next year is paint like heavily emphasizing more and more about how animals are like again once they go extinct we can't get them back or like the abuse. That's something that I wanted to explore more by incorporating deities in my work and showing the divine nature of living beings and the fact that they're sentient, they have emotions, they have thoughts, they have societies and cultures. It's not as complex as human beings, but these are scientific things that have been proven that cows have best friends and cows have emotions and their moos, like, just like cats or dogs, like depending on the octave, depending on the expression, like they're speaking, and we have to think about these things that
Yeah.
they're doing it on a different level than us. I have had so like I've made like little postcards and things like this, but I really want to like focus on a body of work that emphasizes this. I already have like some paintings doing this, but I want to like create more of a body of work emphasizing it to go with those paintings. Um, so that's a goal. The
Yeah.
veganism is more of a goal, like pushing more towards that. But to start out with, that's why I made a section on my website. I've like tried to get more involved with like face to face activism, but because I'm such a busy person, I'm just like, okay, let me find different ways to do it.
And everybody does it different. As a matter of fact, I'm a loudmouth, but
Okay.
when it comes to the vegan stuff, I'm not seen as that. For me, it's always been, this is what I do. I'll talk about and I'll say what I believe.
Right.
But it's just like an area where you can ask me about it, and it's the thing that I do. And everybody has a different dynamic, in within that. Rebecca, I wanted to ask you. We're speaking with Rebecca Mills, artist, teacher, uh, Sun Ra fan, and everybody go dig into some Sun Ra. I think that's the message
So good.
we got so far. But Rebecca, art's super important to you. What is art? Why do you?
Art.
Yeah, what is art?
Yeah, so art for me is when a person makes the conscious decision to transform an object or to transform a thought or a concept into something that is tangible enough for a person to receive it. So, for instance, I'm mainly a painter, so I'm transforming the stretcher bars, the canvas, the oil paint into a tangible object for you to receive it. Most recently, I had a book made, so I wrote a book of poems. Um, the poems are dedicated to Krishna and their love poems. And for me, the words are also art. And then I made a painting for the cover that is also like a work of art. So I'm transforming all of these different materials into something tangible, which is a book. And that in itself is a work of art. I mean, I also think of Marcel Duchamp, how he would take objects
Yeah,
and reconfigure them so that we can think about what are these objects to us. And so that's also a way to think about what art means to me is, like it can be anything, but I'm recontextualizing something so that you can understand it from this perspective.
yeah, I love that, and I think I really connected to you. The terms you use in describing your thinking of transcendence, transformation, that it's holding these elements, but it's the artist like repositioning and reshaping, that I enjoy, and that display. I adore painting, and so I think you can see your universe that you're talking about, in the paintings,
Yeah.
that you have. Is art now more important than it has been? Like, you get these, we come out of the pandemic. We talked about the environment. I could go on endlessly about political behavior as seen for me in the United States of America and worldwide. Like, so then you got art, and like, is art more important than ever? Like right now to, like, I don't know, help.
Yeah. Honestly, I think art is always important. And I think that because the arts keep getting defunded, yes, it is more important than ever because people need to understand if you keep defunding this, you're going to have a bunch of very depressed, miserable people who will
Yes.
not be able to like see the world, will not be able to understand it. And this is like me coming from as an art teacher, like I have taught in schools, I've done things, but a lot of the reason why I don't get to do that as much is because the programs I was teaching got defunded, or like the organizations I was working for like didn't need me anymore, or like they can't find a way to like make it validated enough to justify why they have an art teacher here. So it's like,
Yeah,
then
and the
that's just like,
casual nature
yeah.
of the casual nature of like the work relationship when it comes to educated people and smart people like yourself. There's a casual relationship within the academics as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, it's I think specifically in academia, like how can you expect well-rounded adults if they're not actually well-rounded, if you just have them in a very narrow perspective of what is relevant, like
Yeah.
if you're saying only math, science, and specifically US history and like limited US history is
Oh
important,
God. Oh
like,
God.
you know what I
That's
mean?
version two. Let's
Right.
Rebecca and I gonna talk about the version of American history. That's a
Oh
whole
my
other one. But
god, that's a
sure,
whole other thing. But
sure.
if you're saying only this is important, then it actually makes it much, much harder for the people who want to beautify the world. You know, like how can you even have architecture if people don't know that they can artistically create a house? Or, you know, even industrial design, like how can you do any of these things if you're not teaching people, you know, design itself? Even if you like, you know, for instance, like the Met, I don't know if you've been to the Met before, but the
I
Met is
haven't
like,
been to the Met before. No.
yeah. Well, you know, it's a well-known place. It's massive and it hosts a wide variety of things, but they have a whole section dedicated to design where it's like chairs, furniture, clocks, things like that. And it's important to know that these objects can also be seen as art if it's designed in a way like what attracts people. You know, beauty attracts people.
Yeah.
How can people understand beauty if you're not giving them the foundation, or if you're not giving them the knowledge or history of what has been and what could be? You know, you're not giving people that space. I mean, for instance, when I was teaching as an adjunct, and again, that's another program where it's like, who knows when I'll be teaching it again, because the school was like, you know, there's so many complicated things with it. But when I was teaching as an adjunct, none of my students were like majoring in art, because it wasn't specifically a class, it wasn't a school specifically dedicated to art. They had my course as an elective. So all of them were either like studying culinary arts or studying business or studying all these things. They come in my class and they're learning something different. And for them, it was therapeutic. And that should be emphasized enough. Like, giving people a therapeutic outlet
Yeah.
is so important, because then you have less people that are like lashing out, or less people like finding way, you know, like abusive ways to handle their problems, you know, like,
Sure.
so even just giving people that much is important. And especially after the pandemic, it's like you have people who severely are depressed because they were trapped inside, lost their job, or lost this or lost that, maybe even got sick, and like that harmed them.
Physiologically, it could be simple if
Right.
an outcropping of physiological changes due to disease. Yep.
Exactly. And it's like,
Yep.
if you give people a creative outlet, if you tell people like it doesn't have to look like a perfect thing, like it can be this, it can be that. If people are able to comprehend this, if people are able to use their hands and do skill building with their hands, and understand that art can be anything as long as you have someone guiding you, or, you know, you have something that you can look at and be inspired by, or, you know, even like people knowing that you can go to a museum and not know anything about what's there, you can enjoy it because you were trained to look at it. Like, these types of things matter so much.
Yeah. Yeah, and it can have that impact. And I think I think there's a lot underneath what you're saying when you're describing, you know, the painting, as far as what you can see, but also what's underneath and what's embedded within the meaning. And I think that's what's fun to what's fun to explore, those elements, not just to pick it apart, but to maybe understand it more with the representations. I know, like, art feels like, I think the answer, like, on the role of art a lot of times is like, in the back of my head, it's like human beings born into the earth and the sky is always going to collapse. Like there's something, you know, that there's going to be God's wrath, or I mean, it just seems like we have this kind of. So I think about, you know, is the situation different now than it has been? I think it fundamentally is. I think it
Yeah.
fundamentally is different, like right now, on the question of habitability, like you said. And I think in response to that, I think um, art can be a helpful place to look for, as far as, you know, whether it's transcending or counteracting that, or shit, understanding it, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Like that
Yes.
picture, like, said it to me, and I'm talking and talking, can't explain it, but that picture, yeah. So,
Yeah. And even for myself, like, so I have I am I like meditate. I've done a lot of yogic practices. So I have done yogic practices which opened up myself. And so I've had I've had astral projection experiences,
Mm-hmm.
and in some ways it's like I accepted insanity to see this, because it's like there are things that have opened or like it shown itself to me that it's like, how could I like explain this to anybody? I'm like, I feel like a
Yeah.
crazy person. I'm like,
Yeah.
am I schizophrenic? But it's like, no, this is like a part of being a very spiritual transcendental person.
Sure.
So one way for me to kind of channel that has been through painting and writing and expressing this ecstasy that I have experienced, because that's really what it comes down to. It's like I have this ecstasy of the soul or ecstasy of the spirit, and I can transform it into my art. So I do actually have I have a body of work too, based off of astral projection, based off of these like very type of seemingly psychedelic experiences. And that for me is also like an outlet. And I think for to be able to create such things is the therapy in itself, is like the this beautiful outlet. And I think to be able to express that too to people, like I don't suffer from mental health issues, but I think for people who do have mental health issues, if they're able to see art like this and know that it's coming from a place from somebody who has like very introspective, very like spiritual things, it's like, oh wow, like I can kind of understand my own mental
Yeah.
landscape too, you
Yeah.
know. And because a lot of times like people who don't know much about art, they think that like art has to be a certain way, or because you know they're not exposed to much of it, so like they think art has to be a certain way, or all art has to be realistic, or like, you know, they're intimidated by abstract expressionism, or like, you know, they don't know what real art is. So it's like, I think, you know, making this, and I say psychedelic because there's no other way to describe it, but making this like very
Yeah. It's a
psychedelic,
handle.
yeah, like making this very psychedelic kind of art, you know, it could give them a way to say like, wow, there's something that relates to me, you know, something that relates to like my mind. And that's also important. Like, you know, they can see and know without knowing, you know?
Yeah. I wanted to mention too, so I didn't want to forget about your reference to a lot of the knowledge and wisdom like within indigenous cultures around, like that you had mentioned and that you looked at, and I just wanted to just to mention, like on the show, my own personal deep experience of learning with indigenous guests I've had. I've had guests from over 16 indigenous nations.
Yeah.
Um, on the show, and I found that one of the greatest things that would happen for me was a fundamental questioning of reality in terms
Yeah.
that we use to understand what's around. Now, as a philosopher, I felt I've always done that, but I think I've done that in a very Western colonial way, not even realizing just the inertia of what you encounter. And I believe there's a kind of like a radical, beautiful transformation I've experienced of question and being like, what do I need to see? What is being presented? What fact did I lazily take to be the case that is not
Yeah.
only questionable, it's 100% false? Dealing with that,
Right.
and so I appreciate you bringing out the your experience of what you've learned and think about to come through in your art, because it I don't that's why it's good to talk about art, I think
Yeah, and
sometimes
I
too,
I
you know.
appreciate that too, because I actually my interest in philosophy started with taking a metaphysics class,
Yeah.
and it wasn't at all what I thought it would be. I was like, wait a minute, you guys are doing everything to prove God is not real. This is not what I was expecting. And so that was interesting, because I'm like, okay, this
Yeah.
is very different than, you know, if I were to learn about African philosophy, because African philosophy, it's talking about how we understand the transcendental nature of the world. And it's not an emphasis on empirical nature. It's not an emphasis on like saying,
Sure.
you know, all these things. And so I get what you're saying. And so like I at least have had the privilege to kind of understand both. Um, and I think it is important to have both sides. Like, even though westernization in Westernized philosophy is very harmful to indigenous people because, it's more of an emphasis of conquering nature rather than understanding we are non-different than this nature. But I think it is kind of important to understand both, because then it helps give more on my end. For me personally, it gives me compassion for people who think a certain way, and it's like, okay, I can kind of
Yeah.
understand why you think this way, but realize that this is also why these people think this way. And it's your perspective, and that's why I heavily am against empiricalism, because empiricalism is like, that is your perspective, like this is your perspective and you're writing about it.
Yeah.
What's empirical to you is completely different than what's empirical to me, because that's where these psychedelic paintings come from, because it's like, this was empirical for me because I saw this, but I can't prove it otherwise other than painting this. So, and that's the same thing with indigenous people. Like, they see their spirits, they see the spirits that govern their cultures, they see these gods, and that's why they create the statues, or that's why they create costumes based on, that's why they harness this nature, because they know that this is real because they have seen it. This is the same thing in with in India with Hindu deities. Like, there's hundreds of different deities, and so it's called darshan when you go to see the deity. So you'll see that there's these beautiful, elaborate images of these deities, and it's, from a westernized lens, it's seen as mythology, but it's like, no, but if you worship the deity enough, they present themselves to you, because I myself have seen deities because of worship. So it's like, Western philosophy will make spiritual people who are concerned with transcendental topics feel schizophrenic, but it's like, no, schizophrenia is a real serious disorder. Like, psychosis, these are real serious disorders. This is not psychosis. This is the transcendence of this material world, and it's important to keep it as a validated topic. So I think it's nice that you've been able to talk with people who are directly from these cultures, because then they're able to speak about what it is that they are representing, and help them validate themselves by saying it.
Well, and the very, very deep, diverse. I mean, part of the show, in a sense, is to engage in the different perspectives and the variety. But even within indigenous cultures, radical. I mean, things that Americans don't think about, the radical differences in culture,
Right.
approach to, a land stewardship, and all these differences. But I think in coming in contact with them and through art is a way to be like, I just think that art is a way to get at these things, these complicated interactions that there's no way in hell you can get into that complicated interaction with a stranger, or that there's no place to debate or discuss. So I think it's like the exposure in the contact, and just be like, what is it that we see in hear and do, and what we can take in as a philosopher. That's the piece that's the basis. There's people, this, and human beings like this are philosophers. What is it that I want to believe and reinforce, whether I've thought about it or not, or dad or mom said it, and what it is do I want to go in to truly explore what is art, or
Right.
why we're doing anything that we're doing truly. And anyways, you're fun to play with, Rebecca.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we're talking about the role of art. I wanted to say it. I was joking, kind of. You're something rather than nothing answer. Like I said, I think we've done the show on something rather than nothing. But I don't want to. I do want to place that question out there, which is, speaking of traditional Western questions.
Yeah.
People say I ask it the wrong way. It should be, how is there something rather than nothing? Or and I'm from the Buddhist perspective, I know nothing to mean a particular thing that others, or it might mean within Indian philosophy. But if you missed anything on why is there something rather than nothing, tell us.
So there's something rather than nothing, because even when this whole world is destroyed and there's nothing that can be seen, even when all the people are gone, there's always going to be something beyond this world. And it's important to think of what is beyond this world, because that's where life comes from. So for me, that is what the something rather than nothing is. That's what we call God. That's what we call the, not just the universe, because it's beyond the universe. That is transcendentalism itself. So that something for me is Krishna, but we call that Krishna so many different names. So there's always something rather than nothing, no matter what. And if that's always emphasized to people, that, you know, like, you're here, even if you're just yourself and you have like what you think of as nothing, you know, you can be homeless on the street. You have something because you're alive, and that life is something, just like with the cows, you know, like the cow has their life, and that is something. And the soil has life, that is something. The grass has life, that is something. The water has life, that is something. So there's always something rather than nothing. And that is the best way to look at the world. That's the best way to look at the universe. Like, you know, you can look at images of outer space, and it's like it feels like there's nothing out there, because it's this vast, endless, infinite place where we can't find another Earth. We can't seemingly find other life forms out there, but something is out there. We just don't really know what it is yet, you know? And that's what Sun Ra was saying. Like, something is there. There's other planets. They exist, something. So there's always something.
Yeah. So tell us for some newer folks, newer listeners on the Sun Ra, what they got to listen to just to jump in. People like to jump in. So is there a direction? I mean, it's an intimidating question with Sun Ra, I would say.
Sun Ra is, like I said, so difficult to process, because his compositions are hard. Like, they're hard. But I think first people should start with watching his movie called Space is the Place. You can find it on YouTube for free. Google Sun Ra, Space is the Place. It'll be there. It'll help you understand him. And it's have you seen the movie?
I haven't, but I'm.
You gotta watch it. You gotta watch the movie.
Later on. It's later on today.
You gotta watch it. So, you know, start with the movie, because then you'll understand what he's talking about in his work overall. But I think, album-wise, music-wise, and I'm on my phone right now trying to like figure out the best.
Complicated question. Maybe even more difficult. Maybe it was more difficult. Why is there something rather than nothing? How do I start with Sun Ra? I didn't know that I had one that's more difficult.
That is so hard. No, I think honestly, so there is a compilation album with some of his more melodic and easy to listen to songs. So it's gonna be called. It's Sun Ra and his orchestra, and it's Giles Peterson presents. So it's called Giles Peterson presents Sun Ra and his orchestra, and it's Giles Peterson compiled this album together. It's in 2 volumes, and it's laid out in a nice way so you can listen from start to finish and not feel so intimidated by him, and help listen to like the more easy to sit and listen to.
It's useful as an entry point, you know. That was
it's a useful entry point, but when you're ready to get into his complex compositions, Crystal Spears is an album that I really love, but it's not for everybody. I can tell you that now. It's not for everybody, but Crystal Spears.
Don't worry, the show is beloved. The podcast is beloved and not for everybody. Sun Ra. Sun Ra. No, I love that and what you had to say. And I think about in terms of sound and in the whole universe in Sun Ra. And it goes back to my friend Larry in studying philosophy. Sun Ra. I thought
he got it.
I thought he was the madman, my madman friend around the corner, but he was the one screaming the truth.
Yeah.
Rebecca, before we let you go here, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to tell folks how to, if you could tell folks how to encounter the work that you do, your paintings, whether it be physical, in place, social media, website, that type of thing.
So as of now, all of my artwork is currently in storage. I had to give up my studio. I was dealing with like different environmental factors because it wasn't really like a secure place. Like it constantly had leaks and like mold and stuff like that. But also, it was a space where it was more of an art collective. It was an artist collective, so it was different artists in there. I was only a Black person, and I was dealing with an angry white guy and his complacent wife, and then like a third person who was more like, she kind of was just aloof about reality. So it just wasn't a healthy environment for me, because it's like they didn't realize how much they were differentiating me, and it's like they could not see that this is racism. It's I was very patient and kind about it, but it got to the point where I'm like, you don't know that you're racist, I'ma just go.
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear about that. Yeah.
I know, but but now my art itself is in storage, but I have my Instagram, which has some images on there. So my Instagram is honeydew_milkshake. I have my website, which needs to be updated. There's some older works on there, but it's still like a nice way to kind of see some of the work. Like there's the mermaids on there. Yeah. There's some images of deep space on there. There's not many images of water on there, but these are different ways to do it. I'm not currently exhibiting right now, so can't tell you about seeing an exhibit, but those are some ways too.
Yeah. Well, I just encountering and I like I said, visually drawn into the universes there, and I get quickly pulled in. I think, honestly too, is from like I grew up and still am obsessive around like comic books and sci-fi novels. So for me, I always like to go somewhere else. Like, and I see that in your painting. I'm like, I want to be there because I know it's somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that. I like hearing that. I used to read comic books, not like superhero comic books, more like Sandman and like those types,
Oh, you're in fine territory. I read those. Yeah. But the problem is with me is there is the literary types too, and Neil Gaiman and Sandman, which I do adore. I also read trashy comic books.
Okay.
I also read Archie. I also read.
I loved Archie.
The bazooka laden action ones. So I get into them all. But no, now you said Sandman. Now I'm like seeing some of the celestials in your paintings. But beautiful universe. And of course, have you seen the show Sandman?
I didn't know there was a show.
Okay, so you read it. Okay, so let me tell you. So you've read it, but the adaptation came out on Netflix, and there were 11 or 12 episodes, and I thought they were phenomenal and beautiful.
Oh, yeah?
But what is super cool is the death character in the comics is a Black woman.
Oh, interesting.
In goth garb, and she's a British actress. And anyways, Sandman the show.
Gotta check it out.
Check it out. It was a beautiful rendition. But Rebecca Mills, your art making us think about all these different types of things. Yeah, I got the teacher in you. I wanted to thank you so much for coming out to the show and really like kind of like great chat and learning a lot. And I got to go do the Sun Ra movie you referred to, and some of the other listeners are going to. But again, just wanted to thank you for coming on the show and really just like letting us know what you're up to, what you're thinking about, and some of those profound thoughts.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for reaching out. And I love the email that you sent where it's like, I'm obsessed with your art. I'm like, of course I want to be on your show. What?
As I am enthusiastic, one of the things about getting folks on, I think a lot of times maybe we think that we're supposed to do it a different way, and because you can do things however you want to do things, it'd be like, that is awesome what I saw of you. Like, I can't figure it out, or I understand it completely. I want to talk to you about it. So it's great that you've done that, and we're able to connect with you from New York over here to the woods here in Oregon. Thank you so much, Rebecca, and I'll totally be checking out a bunch more of your art, and big 2023 to you as well.
Thank you so much. You too.
Absolutely. Take care now.
You too. Bye.
This is Something Rather Than Nothing.